Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now here we are once again testing another new release with just the power of integrated graphics. Today it's the turn of Saints Row. Whatever your opinion of this game, we are of course here to talk about one thing and one thing only, which is performance. But as a little side note, I have to say I am enjoying myself so far. I think the in-game setting looks great and I've been having a blast driving around causing carnage. The developer stated system requirements are pretty detailed, and it's always much appreciated when there are different guidelines for varying resolutions and frame rates. I also like the ability to choose between which API to use each time we start the game. This is good news for users of old and perhaps lower end hardware. I found that the game runs just fine with the high settings at 1080p with Vulkan on my Ryzen and RTX 3050 PC here. I got a couple of extra frames over DX12 on average, but this will be hardware dependent of course. The RTX 3050 is a modern entry-level card that's more than capable of offering up solid performance with respectable settings in most titles, and with just under 70 FPS here, Saints Row is no exception. The Ryzen 7 5700G isn't really breaking a sweat, but let's see how it does after we remove the card from the system. First, a quick look at the settings. Plenty to choose from here, and as I mentioned, I was using high for this intro gameplay, but of course we'll be needing to go with low as we progress from now on, or whatever the minimum is that each respective option drops down to. We can actually go all the way down to 640 by 480 resolution, which is always a nice inclusion, even if there's probably not many of you out there who are going to use it, unless you're really struggling to maintain a level of performance that you find acceptable. Let's start with the Ryzen 7 5700G, 16 gigs of 3200MHz dual channel DDR4, and the integrated Radeon graphics. On startup, we get the choice of DX11 or 12, the latter of which was recommended. This did seem to offer slightly better performance with this specific hardware. At 1080p with the lowest settings, including the disabling of anti-aliasing, we did see at least 30 FPS on average, and the percentile lows weren't too bad either. Different areas of the map and different missions will impact this of course, but it's not a bad start. That said, I dread to think what we'll be needing to do to get the Athlon 3000G playing this with over 30 FPS. Now with the Ryzen 7, I'd actually recommend 900p instead. We could potentially turn a couple of options up as well and enable FXAA at this resolution, but retaining the lowest graphical options gives us a little bit of breathing room for when things do drop frame rate wise. This is probably how I'd play if I used this hardware on a daily basis. Because there are a lot more resolution settings to choose from, I've no doubt we could get over 60 FPS, maybe not consistently, but you have to ask yourself if the decreasing lack of clarity would be worth it. That said, the ability to choose resolutions is a luxury that we're about to lose, because with the 3000G, we're forced to go even lower. To try and help out our Athlon, I've actually overclocked the integrated graphics to 1600MHz up from the standard 1100. This really isn't difficult to do and no special precautions are needed. A stock Ryzen cooler will handle this increase just fine, for example. Changing the iGPU frequency setting from 1100 to 1600 is all that's necessary, and no voltage tweaks were performed either. DX12 was again the better option here and produced a couple more frames on average than DX11 mode, and less stutter in my experience. Somehow, despite its 2 cores and 4 threads, the 3000G managed to average 30 FPS, though it goes without saying there will be some dips here and there. Nothing extreme as reflected in the percentile figures, but don't expect to see 30 FPS or above on a constant basis. That just isn't going to happen. That said, what a great effort from the Athlon yet again. It's the APU that just doesn't seem to give up. Hopefully it continues to be supported for a very long time driver-wise. 800 by 600 is also an option of course, and this will boost our average frame rate to above 40. The 1.1% lows are also better, but this resolution certainly won't be for everybody, if anybody. It doesn't look too bad to me because I'm always messing around with lower end hardware, but it certainly isn't ideal in 2022, that's for sure. Next up, it's the turn of Intel's quad-core i3-12300. This is a 4-core hyper-threaded beast with onboard UHD 730 graphics. We didn't have much luck in our last game test, which was Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, but here I managed to get a somewhat acceptable result. DX12 was the way to go for a third time. This offered lower CPU usage and therefore slightly better frame times. The average was also a little higher. Now, it wasn't quite 30 FPS, but it was a good try from a chip with hit and miss support in terms of iGPU drivers. No issues to report though in terms of graphical glitches or crashing, which is always a bonus. Again, 800 by 600 or lower is also an option, and this will increase our frame rate to above 30. Although the CPU is much more powerful than the Athlon, the onboard graphics aren't, and luckily Saints Row 2022 doesn't seem to be very CPU intensive, at least not with the settings I use today. But there we go. The Ryzen 7 5700G didn't have any problems, the Athlon 3000G continues to scrape by, and the i3-12300 managed a better than anticipated result. Say what you will about the game itself, but there's no doubt it's integrated graphics friendly, and that's always nice to see. Thank you very much for watching then. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.